Good afternoon. This is the Torah in Parshas Alothekcha. It's the third portion, Sefer Bamidbar, and this portion is really, in many ways, a turning point for the Jewish people. They've been in Sinai for a year. They received the Torah, continued relearning the oral Torah, all the different laws, and now they were about to embark on what should have been, though it didn't turn out that way. They were going to go supposed to go follow Moshe into the land of Canaan, Eretz Canaan, 31 nations and kingdoms, and was supposed to enter there, conquer the land. And if Moshe had been the leader, it would have been a miraculous entry, not a one where there had to be battles, even though there were few and very few casualties under Yeshua. And Moshe would have discovered the location of the temple. He would have built a temple, and that would have never been destroyed. People would have been at such a spiritual level that the ultimate redemption could have come in Moshe's time. However, through a series of behavior by the Jewish people, that did not happen, and that began in this Parsha. The Parsha opens with Aaron being given and his sons the mission of lighting the lights every night in the Mishkan, the sanctuary. Now, Aaron had been sad because in last week's Parsha, the 12 princes had all brought gifts, but Aaron wasn't called to bring gifts for the dedication of the sanctuary of the Mishkan. And he was very sad, but it was explained to him that by lighting of the menorah that he was doing, which would ultimately extend to this miracle of Hanukkah, which we'll discuss more at the time of Hanukkah, with lights, oil that lasted 8 days. His job was far, far greater than what a gift he was given, the duty he was given, than those of the 12 tribes in the sanctuary. Now, the Parsha then goes on to discuss the dedication of Levium. Levium was supposed to take the place of the firstborn, who had forfeited the right to be administering, to carrying the Mishkan between trips and doing certain other duties. Also, the job was to make sure the Israelim didn't come near the Mishkan and die. And they had to be redeemed. They had to shave the male. The Levium from 30 to 50 had to shave themselves. And they were then waived by Aaron, and they took the place of the Cohen and the firstborn after a whole dedication ceremony. And by what was originally supposed to happen, if it hadn't been the sin of the Egel, the golden calf, we would have gone into Israel within our first year after we got out of Egypt. But since that got delayed because of our behavior, we then had to go into, we had the first Pesach, was by Har Sinai. It was never intended to be that way but by the choices the Jewish people made, that is what happened. Now, certain people said, we're Tameh, we can't bring the Korban Pesach. Tameh from spiritual impurity from dealing with that person. What was going on here? These were the men who brought up the coffin of Yosef and of his 11 brothers, and by that they became Tameh. Therefore, there was a Pesach Sheni proclaimed, where those who were either far distant or were Tameh could do it on the following month of the ER. And it goes into that procedure. And then it goes into the whole thing about how we know when to travel. In the day, there was a light, column of light. There was a cloud that covered the temple. Excuse me. In night, there was a column of fire that told us as long as it was by the Mishkan, we didn't get up. When it rose, we did. And sometimes they would travel for days and stay in a place. Sometimes it would take longer. I'm going to be explaining that in more detail shortly. And it then goes on talking about the making of the silver trumpets, which were two trumpets to gather either the individuals and the leaders of the tribes. And it was also used to announce attacks against the people when we entered the land, the enemy, among other things. Now, they left from Sinai. Now, on this, they were criticized. On this, they were criticized because they left too eagerly, like kids trying to get out of school the last day of school, instead of being, in fact, they've been in Hashem's presence for a year and learned all this incredible Torah. And then Moshe spoke to Yithro, as a number of other names, who was with them, and he invited him to come with them. He didn't. Instead, after Moshe again asked again, there's no more comment. Actually, what happened, Yithro and his descendants came. They settled in an area near Jericho, and they often helped the rest of the nation when there was, they could smell the ketoret, the incense from the temple, and if there's anything wrong with it, change smell, aroma, they knew that something was wrong, and they went to Israel, they went to Yerushalayim to help out. Now, there begins the series of protests. The first thing they did is they left too eagerly in your scenery. Second is they complained about the man, and they complained about all the wonderful food they had in Mitzrayim, which was, of course, the wrong thing to do. And they're complaining they didn't want to meet. People were meeting over, they had nothing to weep about. It was the perfect food. Had no waste, was perfect. And Moshe said, I can't take responsibility of this whole nation. If you're not going to give me help, then better you take me now. And in fact, one Parsha, Moshe's name is not mentioned. So, because when Sinai says something, even conditionally, it takes on that meaning. Takes on that meaning. Now, Hashem gets mad, but he says they'll have meat. They do. Moshe complained, says, how are you going to provide all of that meat? He says, what? He says to him, am I unable to provide abundance? Hashem mildly chastises Moshe. Then they get 72 people to be the Zakanim, the elders, to help Moshe. And what Hashem does is transfer some of the prophetic spirit from Moshe to these 70 people. There were two others. They prophesied in camp. One of the things they were going to prophesy is that that Moshe wasn't going to make it into Eretz Israel. And those who took the meat were severely punished. Again, did not appreciate Hashem. Now then, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moshe. Why? Because they realized he was never intimate with his wife, and they criticized him because they said, Aaron said, I'm a prophet. Miriam said, I'm a woman prophet. Yet we can be with our respective spouses. And they explained. And then Hashem came to Moshe's defense and explained that since he was could get prophecy at any time and spoke panim to panim, like one person to another, to Hashem, he was unique in that way. There's never been, as it says later in the Chumash, never been a prophet like him before or since. And they, after Hashem spoke to him. Miriam, Aaron developed. So Ross, I think, was speaking Lashon Hara for a minute or two. Miriam had it much longer. Moshe was begged by Aaron to release her from it. She had this experience for a week, and after which she became purified. Jewish people waited for her. Now, a very interesting note is that, in fact, Miriam wasn't doing Lashon Hara, false speech to demean somebody, because she was doing it with a Toelis, one of the exceptions to Lashon Hara. If there's a purpose, and there's a useful purpose recognized in the Torah, and she was doing it because she realized how difficult it was for Moshe's wife, not being able to be with him in any event. Why would, so then, according to that opinion, said she didn't speak Lashon Hara, so why did she get it? It was a warning to the people that even had to be very careful. This 10 spies who slandered the land weren't that generation was kept in exile in desert for 40 years, actually 38 years, and that generation died in the desert with the exception of Levium. Men over 40, under 20 at the time, were over 60, and all the women and girls, they didn't participate in any of this. And now what I would like to focus on is a bit of an unusual subject. If one looks, there is at the beginning of the sixth Leah in English, chapter 10, verses 35 and 36, which is Vihi nasa Aaron v'omer Moshe krima Hashem yipritzu aveka v'yinusu v'mishaneka v'baneka v'inakad amer shavo Hashem v'rabavos alafei Israel, which translates, when the ark went forth with the Torah, Moshe said, "Arise, O God, and scatter your enemies, let your enemies flee before you." When it came to rest, it says, "Return, O God, to the myriads of Israel's thousands." Now, these two Pesukim, very interestingly, according to a number of opinions, split up Sefer Bamidbar into three pieces. Now, for most purposes, we say the Chumash has 5 books: Bereshit, Shmos, Vayikra, and Bamidbar, and Devarim. But according to this, these two Pesukim, which have an inverted nun before it, Hebrew letter, and after the second Pasuk, is designed to show that they were, constitutes a separate book of the Torah. Now, there are many explanations of this. In the framework of this Devar Torah, I'm going to give 2 of them and a bit of an introduction to a third one. I am going to be giving a share because of the beauty, length, and complexity of the deeper meaning of these 2 verses. I will be doing a separate share explaining these deeper meanings. And one explanation that's given is, if one looks, those 2 Pesukim are supposed to be a break between the complaints of the Jewish people and the acts of rebellion, which I cataloged before, and those afterwards. And that led on to even the next 2 parshas. With the incident with the spies, where they slandered the land, people started weeping. That led to Tisha B'Av and all other kinds of negative consequences, which we're still experiencing today. And in the parshas after that, there is Korach. There's again in parshas Hukat, Moshe. The people demand water. Moshe breaks the rock instead of speaking to it. It's a topic I will be getting into. We get to Parashat Be Ha. It's one of the more complicated incidents in the Chumash, the Torah, to understand. And what I'm going to do today is I want to explain it on that level. That's one explanation. The second explanation I'm going to give is that of the oral time, explaining who are the foes, who are the enemies, what's going on here in a deeper level, and what I would just like to introduce is another explanation that all the Pesukim before and after is what happened to Hashem, the world, and how it would develop because of the sins of the Jewish people. And within it contains what could have been the ultimate history of the world, which would have been far different, starting with Adam. We had committed the sin and other incidents which could have, people could have made, the world could have made different choices. And from there, it also, from there, it goes into that within there is contained the understanding of what occurred before creation, the universe, at the beginning of the creation, including Adam and Chava, what has evolved since, and what will evolve at the time of Mashiach and beyond, going into many different millennium. Again, in this topic, I will speak about as a separate devote, as a separate shir. Of course, it's quite complicated and extended, but quite interesting. In any event, the Or Chaim asks a number of questions on these two Pesukim, which I'm going to share. One of those he asks, which foes and enemies of Shem is he explaining? Who are the myriads and thousands that Moshe asked Shem to return? Now, he brings, the Or Chaim explains on the basis of the Chachamim, the sages, based on Zohar, that why did Jewish people have trouble through the wilderness? Now, as to be explained, there are forces of impurity that exist. They're called the klipo, it means the shells. They're headed by Samek Mem, Samael, the Eitzah Hara. This is also Esav's angel. And what kind of places do they like? Places of desolation and ruin. Now, there are sparks of Kedusha, of holiness, that are trapped within these klipot. This dates back to events that happened in the time of Adam and Rishon and his sons. Spiritual impurity. Now, what our job was to draw out those sparks of impurity, the sparks of the holiness from the impurity. So who are the two enemies? One of them is the wicked ones. The foes, wicked ones, and those who hate you. So who are the wicked ones? One is a category of evil that tempts people to do evil, called the Yetzer Hara. Second is causes harm and injury. Is to bring direct damages. Okay? So now, the first ones, that when Aaron came up, it moved, the Aron, the sparks of holiness will be extracted from the klipot, and the klipot that had him would be destroyed, because without those sparks of holiness, they collapsed, they shattered. And that's talking about the one. That one, they will be completely broken. However, the forces of evil, the Yetzer Hara, the seductive forces, which we're trying to do is to commit idolatry, do other kinds of arrayos, that's the second type. And that is the ones who hate us. Now, Hey Hashem. Now, if you look at the next verse, he talks about, it says, when we settle, in other words, we sit on a better place, within a specific place. What was that? To take the sparks of Kedusha that are trapped in the purity, and also contains the potential of many different neshamas who are going to play souls and play a great part in our history. So when it's talking about retrieving, it says, bring back, O Shem, the myriads and thousands of Israel. It's talking about bringing those sparks of holiness. Because these were all going to be potential neshamas in the Jewish people. And so why do they have to say, in some places they have to stay a little while, or even just pass through, because if they just pass through, there's not that many sparks of Kedusha. They're able to collect them, and they attract after Torah, plus the 600,000 people, plus Hashem's presence. All of those things draw them out. Now, in other places, they have far more sparks of Kedusha, and therefore we required more land. And we required more land. Time there. There was a lot more sparks of Kedusha to be put out. And that's when it's talking about the myriads. So Hashem prayed that the holiness people might be strengthened. What's it talking in place? That they can defeat the forces of impurity. And so when we got to Eretz Israel, if we had not done inappropriate, not ultimately failed, all the sparks of Kedusha that were stuck in Klipot around the world would have been drawn out of the sparks of the Klipot, the shells, evil shells, and would have been drawn to us in Eretz Israel. Because that didn't happen, it was a combination of our presence, our learning, and our suffering that allowed us to pull it out, which is why we've been exiled in all different places. Now that we're coming back to Eretz Israel, we merit that final completion where all the forces of evil will be destroyed, and for ultimately fulfilling this verse, and we'll have all sparks of Kedusha, and we'll get to the ultimate redemption, and which I'll be speaking about more in my share, where how this process worked and what it has to do with these proper verses will be explained. Good